Hi, everybody. Welcome to week 3. Um, this is a lecture on analyzing need with our stakeholders and building strategies and outcomes. I originally had planned on doing something clever with some animation, decided that that was really distracting, and actually we'll get to that later on in this class. Um, and so let's get started. Um, we're going to talk about analyzing need. When we talk about analyzing need, analysis is the first step of the ADDIE process, right? Analyze, develop, analyze, design, develop, um, implement, and then evaluate. So it all starts with analyzing. And we're going to analysis happens in a lot of different ways and forms throughout the process, but we're going to talk about that initial intake analysis. So when somebody comes to you and says, we need training, what do you do? So that's the analysis we're talking about today. So I kind of equate it to going to the doctor, right? So most of the time we go to the doctor because something hurts. We don't often go to the doctor because we feel good. Although sometimes, some of us are really good at going to the doctor for our annual visits, but most of us it's because something hurts. So that's the first question in the analysis process is, what hurts? What's the pain point? Why are you here? It's because something's not going right and you want it to go right. All right. So once we know what that pain point is, we can say, okay, here's where you are. Where would you like to be? What does success look like? So if we think about this in the sense of, let's say an academic sense, really basic. My students don't write using complete sentences, and I can't read what they write because I don't know when one sentence ends and another one begins. Okay, so what's the solution? My students will begin using punctuation correctly. All right, so now we know what the pain point is and we know what success looks like. So now we have to decide, what is that bridge to get from point A to point B? And that's knowledge and skill. So the third question in the analysis is, what knowledge and skill is needed in order to get there? And we want these to be measurable. Okay. So we need to decide, and we can use Bloom's taxonomy, for example, to build learning objectives, which we'll talk about later in the course if that's not familiar to you, but a lot of you know Bloom's and you know learning objectives. To get from point A to point B, students must be able to do blank, right? So then we have, and so that's the question that you need to answer is what skill or knowledge is missing that we can train on. And then once we know that, the question is, what learning activities can we do to teach that knowledge? So it's really easy for me to say, I'm going to go away from the English example. A mechanic needs to know how to fix a car, but how do they learn how to fix a car? Do they just read it in a book? Does somebody just tell them how to do it? Are they shown how to do it? Do they practice? So then we need to know what kind of activities are going to teach that skill. Okay, so back to the English lesson. What skills are going to teach a student to use a period at the end of a sentence or an exclamation point, or know which one is the right one to use? There might be exercises. There might be, lots of different things you can do. Once we've done that, we go, okay, so what format? What format is the best way for a student to learn this? Is it through classroom activities? Is it through an online lesson? Is it through writing or correcting sentences that are incorrect? Is it all of these things? We'll get back to that in just a minute. And then lastly, once we've decided what the format is, we need to know where we can find the content. And that's part of the analysis, is being able to know where we can gather content from. Okay, so going back to that, what format do we use? And I accidentally left my tea behind my camera, so I'm going to do that really rude thing where I reach. There we go. Okay. Much better. All right. When we're talking about what the best format is, one of the things that Alan talks about in chapter 4, which was last week, so you already read this, is that the answer to what the best learning format is rarely just one thing. right? So we're not like, I can teach students how to use punctuation correctly in an e-learning, and we're done, and we never have to go back to it. We know that's not true, right? That's usually a multifaceted approach. It's holistic or blended in nature. So maybe we introduce a topic in a micro or a mini lesson on the board in a classroom, and then we have a little worksheet that they do where they identify the types of punctuation. And then maybe there's an e-learning that allows them to practice and make mistakes, right? And then um, as we go on, they're going to actually go back to that because eventually, after they learn how to write sentences, they're going to learn how to write paragraphs, and we're going to build on that knowledge. So we follow up with them and continue to build on what they've learned before. Okay, so those are just examples of different ways that we could apply a multifaceted approach to learning. All right, next, what's on my list? All right, a little bit more on analysis. So we ask those questions for a couple of reasons. One of them is because we need to know them in order to build the right solution. And the other one is to keep our brain focused. So you ask those analysis questions, which I'll post underneath the lecture. We ask those questions and we go back to them every once in a while. And the reason why is because it's really easy, especially with all the technology around us, to get sidetracked and want like lights and stars and buttons and all this fun stuff that we can press in order to make our e-learning flashy. And that's not the point of learning ever. The point of learning is to keep the learner motivated to learn, to make sure that we're guiding our learner to more information when they need it and as they need it, and that we provide those 3 M's for them, the meaningful, memorable, and motivational. And so glitz and glam is not in there, and that's not to say it's not important, right? There definitely is a plus side to having like the best graphics in your e-learning or really cool games or really technical and difficult things. But when we look at the ROI or the cost benefit analysis of it, there's nothing there if the content's not there. I don't care how fun your e-learning is. A fun e-learning with bad content isn't going to teach the learner anything. Fun e-learning that's not motivational is not going to teach a learner anything, right? So the focus has to be on motivating and the content. So to kind of bring this to light, maybe you haven't had this happen to you, but I've had it happen to me where I've been in really, really fun classes, especially like, have you ever been to a class and they like give away things if you ask questions? And so you're like, what color is your underwear? And you get like something. It doesn't even matter if it was a good question. And you walk out of those trainings, you're like, that was so much fun. Let's do it again. And you go home and you're at your desk next day and your manager's like, how was that training? It was good. What'd you learn? Gosh, I don't remember. I don't think I learned anything. Right? We've all had that happen. And well, I've had that happen. And on the reverse side, um, we've all had it happen that we've sat and listened to somebody talk in a crowded lecture, and it was sweaty and noisy, and but what they had to say was so poignant and so effective that like you ran out and you bought a book, or you ran out and you donated money, or you volunteered, or you learned a new skill, or whatever it was. But there was no glitz and glam in that, but the motivation was so intense that it made you do something, right? And that's what we want our learning to do. Then once we've got that, if you have the budget and the time and you want to play with it, then you can make it all those shiny things as well. All right. So in this chapter, Alan really introduces the idea of meaningful, memorable, and motivational. And so I want to take a moment and talk about those 3 things and discuss what they mean. And they might mean slightly different things to you, but just as a general overview. When something is meaningful, it means that you can connect to it. And the problem that we run into in e-learning with meaningful is oftentimes We don't know our audience, so we don't know what's meaningful to them. So um, before we can decide what's going to be meaningful or motivational or memorable, any of those things, we need to know our audience. I'm focusing on meaningful though. Um, who are they? What do they know already? Um, for example, I like to say we teach to the 80%. And that means that when I'm in a classroom, what I'm teaching should be relevant to 80% of the students in there. There might be a couple who it's like a little above what they know and they're struggling a little bit. There's going to be a couple who are like, yeah, I've already done that. It's just kind of a refresher. But for the most part, 80% are right there. So think about what your 80% is for your audience. And if you don't have an 80% because your skill level and knowledge and meaningfulness is so scattered, there's a couple things that you can do. One of them is change your audience and refocus your audience, which is really easy if you're building, um, if you can build multiple lessons and you have a lot of budget and all that stuff. But maybe you're a classroom teacher and you have a group of sophomores and they're sophomores regardless of how well they can read or write or do arithmetic. So now you have to think of something else. You can't change your audience. So now what? Now we need to change the learning to adapt to all of our audience's needs. You can do this by having things like test out options. So people who have a certain skill level don't have to do a certain part of the learning because they've tested out of it. Okay. You can also do things like prerequisites. This is something I use a lot because I need to onboard somebody, I need to onboard people onto a product that my company sells, regardless of where they are. And so our product might have this level of information and my customer might be here. So I have prerequisite work for them to build them up. And then once they have that prerequisite work done, we are on a level playing field and then I can teach them. So that's another idea, prerequisite work. Another idea is, and I've seen this used really well in like math lessons and things like that, is you can do learning paths. So you can have one e-learning and then it can say, are you a beginner? Are you advanced? Or are you in the middle somewhere? And you go down a path based on what your skill level is. All right, so those are all options that you can do to make sure that you're building e-learning that's meaningful for you. Memorable. Memorable has a lot to do with the quality of the e-learning. And I don't mean this in like the shiny part, although it does impact this a little bit. But I mean the quality of the content of your presentation. So it's memorable if there's context to it, if there's a narrative arc and the learner can put themselves into that narrative arc. It is memorable if there are scenarios that the learner can engage themselves in and try to work through. Problem solving makes things memorable. It is memorable if there are rewards and consequences. So this gets into gamification a little bit, which we can talk about a little bit. But if they don't want um, to get a point taken away or they want to earn a star or whatever, those are types of things that help make learning memorable. Gamification is a way to make learning memorable. And then motivational. Gamification can also be motivational too. But when I think of motivational, I think of motivational in the sense that this skill is going to change my life somehow. It's going to make my job easier. It's going to make school easier. It's going to help me understand a concept I didn't understand before. I can immediately apply it. Um, I um, I learned it and I want to learn more is motivational. So those are the 3 M's: meaningful, memorable, motivational. All right, I'm going to take this last chunk of time. We're going to talk about strategy. Alan has a really short chapter on strategy, and actually what I have to say on strategy doesn't have a whole lot to do with what's in the chapter, although what's in that book is valuable. But I wanted to make sure that we talked about the fact that um, strategy is long-term, right? It can be a year out. It can be 6 months out, I guess. It could be a year out. It could be, but it's in the future. We're looking out. And you should always, always, always have a long-term strategy. You should always be working towards something. I think this is a really weird analogy that just popped in my head, but have you ever learned how to break a brick or break a piece of wood? Um, they'll tell you the brick the piece of wood up, and they'll tell you to not aim for the wood, but aim past it. Okay, and just popped in my head as a great analogy because that's what you're doing with strategy. Is you're you're going past um, the immediate future. Okay. However, strategy also means don't let strategy get in the way of like what needs to be done here and now. Um, so some of you, as you're thinking of your practicum, might have really, really big ideas and super excited about them. Um, and you should definitely build those out. But if you are building this, for example, to solve for a problem um, in your current situation at work or for your students or whatever, you also need to build a solution, an interim solution. So you have your strategy and then you have your interim. And I have an example of this that I worked through with a client and I wanted to share with you as briefly as I can. I had a client who was, he sold mobile service. He was a reseller of a mobile service and he actually had a growing business. He had started off with just like a handful of employees, like 3 or 4, and then was onboarding a bunch more. And so he contacted me because he thought as this continues to scale, his sales associates are going to need to be trained in a way that's scalable for him. So I thought e-learning was a good solution. He had a really good idea. I mean, we talked and his vision was really admirable. So the idea was that we would build like 18 e-learnings and they would all be under 20 minutes. They would all include scenarios and practices, and they would also include a checklist that you would then go through with your mentor to make sure that they could witness you doing these things in a real environment, sort of like an apprenticeship. Um, and then there were rewards and all these incentives for doing a good job. And I really admired not only his work ethic and how he felt about his employees, but the program itself seemed like such a great idea. And then so I said to him, "So what's scaling look like for you? You know, what's your hiring outlook?" And he said, "Well, I'm hiring 18 now, like right now, and then I'll have 36 in the end of 3 months." So I really like this idea, but I had to ask him, "Well, what's your solution for now?" He's like, "I don't know. I don't know what my solution is for now. Everybody that I've hired so far has been trained by me." I said, "Okay, so we need 2 things or 3 things to be happening at the same time. We need that long-term solution to start being worked on because we don't want to lose sight of our long-term solution. But we also need an interim solution because you've hired somebody right now. You've hired 18 people like right now who need to be trained. And your plan is to have another 36 in a couple months, and the e-learning still won't be built." And so I'm not going to get into the details of what we did, but I'm going to say that we built a plan that solved for those 3 needs and worked concurrently. And this is where sometimes people get in trouble is like, I have an immediate need, I have another immediate need, and that long-term solution never um, gets done. And so we immediately allocated resources to help build that long-term solution. And then we had other resources that were there to solve the interim solution. And that's how we're able to structure his problem. So just a little tidbit on strategy is, always, and it can change over time. It's not like that strategy has to look the same. I built a strategy this past year and about halfway through the year I went, that was what my brain thought was a good idea a half a year ago, and now I'm seeing the business in a whole other way, and my strategy needs to change for that. All right. I hope I haven't bored you. If you have questions, please let me know. I will definitely do that animation in the future so that you can see how fun it is to play with these sort of tools that we have. But I guess I will say that those fun tools should be used sparingly because they can be quite distracting. All right, thank you.